Okay, so what if the world's biggest superpower just decided to stop paying its dues for the global system it helped build? Well, there's a policy proposal on the table that could do just that, and it could totally reshape who holds power in the world. So in this explainer, we're going to break down who really comes out on top.
And hey, that phrase right there, a seismic shift, that's not me being dramatic. That's a direct quote from the material we're looking at today. It's how experts are describing what could happen if the US cuts its funding to the United Nations. So yeah, the stakes are pretty high. Let's get into it.
All right, so the plan has a nickname, the chainsaw approach. And, a chainsaw isn't exactly a scalpel, right? It's for making huge, sweeping cuts. And that's pretty much the idea here, slashing billions of dollars in U.S. funding for all sorts of UN operations, including things like critical peacekeeping missions.
This really brings us to the core of the issue. If the United States, which was basically the main architect for a lot of these global groups, just up and leaves, what happens then? Does the whole thing just fall apart? Well, according to the sources we're looking at, it's not quite that simple.
See, these global institutions don't just disappear. The argument here is that when the U.S. steps back, it doesn't just leave an empty space. It creates an opening. And you can bet there are other global powers, especially China, that are more than ready to step right into that opening.
And look, this isn't just some theory. We've actually seen this movie before. During the first Trump administration, the U.S. pulled out of several UN groups. And what did we learn? The system keeps chugging along whether America is participating or not.
And this slide really shows you the trade-off, plain and simple. When the U.S. backed away from organizations like UNESCO or the UN Human Rights Council, it wasn't a neutral move. As the U.S. disengaged, it gave up its seat, it lost its vote, and that left an empty chair at some really important tables. A chair that China was happy to take, giving it more influence to shape the global conversation.
Now, this isn't just some abstract diplomatic game. This has real, tangible consequences for the tools you use every single day. Let's start with the internet itself. Have you ever heard of the ITU? Probably not, and that's okay, most people haven't, but it's secretly one of the most powerful organizations on the planet. Just think of it as the world's referee for telecommunications. It's a UN agency, and it sets the technical rules for how everything from the global internet to satellites all work together. It's a huge deal. So what happens when China gets a leadership role in a group like that? Well, between 2015 and 2022, a Chinese national was in charge of the ITU. And during that time, Beijing used that position to push for its own tech standards, to help out Chinese companies, and, according to critics, to push for rules that would basically build authoritarian values right into the structure of the internet.
And this isn't just about the internet anymore. These exact same battles are now being fought over the future of artificial intelligence. The same power struggles are happening over global health standards at the WHO. The decisions made in these rooms are going to shape everything, from AI bias to your personal privacy. Giving up a seat at that table means letting other countries with very different ideas about human rights define our future.
Okay, so with stakes this high, you'd think the reason for cutting funding must be that the cost is just crippling, right? That it's some unbelievable financial burden. Well, let's actually take a look at the price tag.
In 2023, the U.S. contribution to all UN organizations added up to about $13 billion. Now, don't get me wrong, that is a lot of money. But to really understand a number that big, you need some context.
And here's the context. That $13 billion is just 0.2%. That's 0.2 of the entire U.S. federal budget. I mean, just look at that tiny sliver. Now compare it to the 13% spent on defense. It's not even in the same ballpark.
And that leads right to the core financial argument from the source material. When you think about the amount of global influence the U.S. gets from that money, 0.2% is, as the quote says, an absolute bargain.
So what does that bargain actually buy? The argument is that it buys the greatest home field advantage in global affairs. Think about it. The U.S. basically designed the UN back in 1945, building American values right into its DNA. Now, that doesn't mean the U.S. wins every argument, but it does mean it can rally the world to condemn invasions, organize sanctions, and lead global responses in a way that no other country can.
So this all boils down to a really fundamental choice. The question isn't if these global institutions are going to exist. They will. The real question is who's going to lead them, and whose values are they going to represent?
And that really leaves us with this final, thought-provoking question. If you look at history, there's a pretty clear pattern of what happens next when the world's leading democracies decide to take a step back and leave a power vacuum on the world stage.
And that pattern is this. The source material ends on a really blunt note. That power vacuum doesn't stay empty. When democracies retreat,
autocracies rush in to take their place. And that's something to think about as the world figures out who's going to write the rules for the 21st century.